Hey guys, this is Daniel Cutright, host of the Winning Mentality podcast. Just wanted to take a minute before we get into the show today and say thank you to all of the listeners, your continual support. It's so much appreciated. And we're actually in the process now of looking for sponsors for the Winning Mentality podcast, which is exciting. And so if you want to get the word out about your brand, product, or event, we have some phenomenal guests coming up soon. You can reach out to me via email. It's cutrightpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, cutrightpodcast@gmail.com. And we can find a way to work together to tap into our network of loyal listeners to keep the show going strong. Support comes from listeners like you. So thank you again for your continued support, encouragement, and sharing each episode to spread these awesome stories and positivity they deliver. If you enjoy the show, you can show your support by donating via Venmo to username @winningmentality. You can think of Venmo as like a virtual tip jar. And so these donations will go towards hosting and production expenses, whether it's $1 a month or $10 a month. It's all appreciated and helps keep the show going strong. And so think of it like once a month, you're buying me, the host, a cup of coffee. I love coffee and I love doing the show. And so it's all very much appreciated. Even if it's just a one-time donation, that's awesome too, and can help us continue to grow the show and leverage additional resources to keep bringing on quality guests and inspire more and more people. And so if you decide to donate, feel free to also include a short message and let me know why, whether you just enjoy the conversations or maybe there was a specific episode that impacted you in some way, shape, or form. I would love to hear about it. Last thing before we get into the interview, I'm always appreciative of the listeners who take the time to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. These reviews and ratings help new listeners find the show and also let future sponsors know what the listeners like you think. Thanks to everyone who recently shared an episode on their Instagram and Twitter as well. Tag me and the guests from that week, and I'll do my best to reshare. So again, thank you for all the support. Now let's get to it. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. My name is Daniel Cutright, your host, and very excited about our guest today. Somebody that I think you guys are going to take a ton from, not just from the subject matter area, but also from her story and how she has moved into more of kind of an entrepreneurial vein. But Leighanne Gerstbrein, good to have you on. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you and I had a chance to catch up, and like I said, excited for people to hear from you, because I think that for our audience, the topic that we're going to hit on is something that everybody goes through periods, or probably all the time, where they're looking to change behaviors and make a behavioral change in some facet of their life. They're looking to develop new habits. And so this is something that I think is going to be applicable for everyone listening, and it's one that people are going to share and share again. And so excited to jump into that. But the other piece that I want to at least touch on the front end, because I think you have something in common with several other folks that I've had on the show, and that is that you're someone who, on top of their corporate career working in the field that you're in, chose to take your expertise and knowledge and branch out on your own and have this entrepreneurial aspect to your story, where now you're in business for yourself. And I always love when people take that step to actually do that. So maybe we'll hit a little bit of that on the front end, but just to give our audience a little background on you, maybe let's start there. Tell us a little about your background, where you went to school, college athlete, right? And then moved into the work that you're doing now.
Yeah. So we'll start with that. I got my undergrad from ODU. I majored in exercise science with a minor in health and wellness. And then I got my master's in health studies. So I've been in the health and wellness industry for a total of 9-ish years now. And I've always known that this was my niche, really. But it didn't take me that too far into being into the field, where I started to pick up on this common trend when it came to our health behavior, but really just our behavior in general. And that was when it came to these things, most of us knew the things that we should be doing, but we just weren't doing them. And myself included. I mean, I could relate to this, but I thought it was fascinating because no one is really addressing this. For instance, I was a personal trainer for a little bit after college, and I just kept seeing trainers. We would just give people workout plans, or dietitians or nutritionists would just tell people what to eat, or your doctor would just tell you what to do. But when you look at the science of human behavior change, we know that's not how it works. We know that knowledge alone isn't enough, and telling people what to do doesn't work. So that's really what inspired me to go back and get my master's. And then in the long run, open up LGB Well, which is my side business.
So your full-time work, talk about your full-time work now a little bit. Was this something you said you jumped into after you went back and got your master's? Were you working in this field already?
So I was already working in this field and I got my master's while doing this job. So I've had my corporate job for about 4+ years now. I am a health promotion coordinator for a government group. So I run their health and wellness program.
Gotcha. And do you feel like when you were in this corporate job, you started to just see more and more of these recurring patterns with people? And that was really kind of what sparked you. Hey, I want to go back. I want to branch out. And I feel like I can almost do this better or serve more people on my own. Was that kind of the route of why you decided to go into business for yourself?
Yeah, a big part of it was feeling like I have a lot to offer this field, but I'm limited in the capacity that I can offer it in that role. I mean, technically, working for someone else in the contractor role, I feel a little limited by what's in the scope of my contract. But this is such, I mean, like you said, behavior change is something that we can all relate to. I mean, there's so much there for all of us. And there's so many different, it's multifaceted, right? I mean, it's just endless, the possibilities. So that was a big push for me to want to open up my own.
Yeah. And have you seen that in some of the work that you've started to branch out and doing on your own? Like, how has that been different? Maybe talk about how you've been working with people from a behavioral change standpoint.
Honestly, it feels more intimate.
Okay.
More in the sense like these people are people who have my cell number and we may be texting every day. The relationships formed are more intimate. I think one reason for that is because they're now making this investment. It's not like a free service at their corporate job. It's an investment into themselves. And so it's one both them they take very seriously and I do too.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a way more intimate relationship. And I think anytime you make an investment in yourself, automatically then the odds of you seeing the outcome that you want are higher because you're more heavily invested.
That's big. I like how you're talking about the relationship piece there too, because it brings in the element of accountability when people are looking to make behavioral changes. And now you're working with these people one-on-one. Talk about because you would view yourself maybe as like a coach, right? For these people.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe talk about the communication aspect with people. All right, because we're going to get into a little bit more of like maybe the science behind habit formation, that sort of thing. But how do you think about communicating with these people as they're looking to create new behaviors? Are there certain ways that you're trying to help them do this?
Yeah, definitely. Well, a few different things come up for me when you ask that. One is I tell people in the beginning, you're going to do way more of the talking and I'm going to do way more of the listening. It's my job to really reflect back to you to make sure, I have a good understanding of where you're at and make sure you have a good understanding of exactly where you're at and exactly where you want to get to. And then from there, it's meeting you where you're at. And that requires active listening and then compassion too, right? And empathy, because I think that's kind of the prerequisite for you to feel safe opening up to me. And then once we're there, then we can start to talk about, okay, then what are the next best steps forward and how are we going to get there? But we need to feel heard and understood. That's really a prerequisite to connecting with someone and feeling safe opening up to make the progress that you want to make.
Yeah. And that's probably big for people too, because when people have these behaviors that they haven't been able to change, there's probably almost a little sense of embarrassment there, or like you said, reservation or walls up that they're like, man, this is something that I've just been dealing with for so long. And so you're right. I think building trust with those people so that they feel safe to start opening up so then that they can change that behavior that's got to be huge.
Yeah, it is. It's intimate. It's intimate for a lot of us, and the relationship is intimate. And that can take time, but you should build up that trust and you should trust whoever you're confiding in.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest behaviors that you see most people wanting to make changes with? I know you mentioned your health background. I would imagine there's probably a lot of health related behaviors that people are after making changes on.
Yeah, I would say weight loss is the number one. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is through food. It's through addressing our relationship with food, mindful eating, obviously exercising more, but certainly a strong mindfulness component to it.
Okay, awesome. All right, so let's get into a little bit of the science of habit formation here. Or maybe before we do that, when we think about how big of a role habits play in our day-to-day, like on a daily basis, how many behaviors of ours are actually just on autopilot? How many behaviors or habits exist that we probably don't even realize? And how do we go about identifying which habits are serving us well and maybe which ones aren't serving us as well?
Right. So they say that about 40% of our everyday behavior is what you just described. It's a habit. And that means that it's on autopilot mode. And that means that we can do it like unconsciously without thinking about what we're doing as we're doing it and why we're doing it. Right. I can be brushing my teeth and be thinking about something entirely different because I'm not required to think about what I'm doing as I'm doing it. So if about 40% of our behavior every day is that, then it's not an actual conscious decision like, okay, here's what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So the second part to your question there is you could sit down and take the time to write out, and this might sound easier in the beginning, just 10 habits. So 10 things you do almost every day. Write down 10 habits you have every day. And then I think once you get writing, a lot of us all of a sudden are like, whoa, this is actually harder than you'd think it would be. But then once you write down your 10, then you can look at them and say, okay, which one of these are self-directed? And that means self-directed, these are usually formed in adulthood and with intention or with a purpose behind it. For instance, I'm going to exercise because it makes me feel good or because I want to lose 5 pounds. It's a self-directed habit as opposed to something that's experience directed. So you could write down SD or ED next to all your habits. The experience directed ones are usually formed when we're younger, or maybe it's something like scrolling through social media, something that we do every day, but we're not even quite sure why we're doing it, or we're not doing it with a particular outcome in mind.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take the social media one, for example, because I bet you that's one that a lot of people can
all relate to.
Relate to. I'm guilty too, right?
Oh,
I will get in the black hole of where all of a sudden I'm on TikTok and I look up like 20 minutes later and I'm like, what just happened, right?
For me, the weekly report at the end of the week. I'm like, but really?
Oh, it's terrifying. I know. I always try to like now beat my goal every week of like, gosh, I need to like lessen my screen time here. But it's so true, right? Like, and here's the thing, like app development companies, they figured this out. They figure out things to make you get sucked in to those certain behaviors of constantly clicking on the app and all of those sorts of things. So if we took that example, how do I down my TikTok or Instagram consumption?
Yeah. So what you want to do then, you're saying, is spend less time a week on social media.
Yes. Yes. All right. That's my goal.
Okay. So we would want to break this down. First, we take a look at it and say like, okay, why is this really important to you? What is this going to create more or less of in your life?
Yeah.
And we would spend a lot of time there and really get into what this is going to do for you. How's it going to make you feel? What tangible differences are you going to see in your life from doing this? And then we can start to break it down really piece by piece to start to implement small changes. And so I say all of the time, baby steps are definitely the way to go here, but it would be just little tweaks each day. And we can get into specifics too of how to do that.
Okay. All right. So I think this is a good point to bring up. I have always heard this and I just always went with it because I'm like, oh yeah, like that sounds like it makes sense, right? But there's the whole 21 days to create a habit or 21 days to make a habit change. Is there any truth to that or is that just made up?
I'm so glad you said that because that gets brought up all the time. And I think it's one of the biggest myths to habit change.
Okay.
It's not like an X amount of time to create a habit. Really, what creates habits or replaces habits more than just duration of time is the intensity of which you pursue it or the reps.
That's really good.
Yeah. And the reps of how much you practice. So for instance, say I wanted to improve my front stroke. And I just went out for 21 days and did 5 hits and then went inside. 21 days have passed, but I'm probably not that much better as opposed to if I did 100 reps. Common sense, right?
Totally. That's good. Cause then I think of it, I relate to like the 10,000 hour rule. If you want to become an expert at something, and that totally makes sense, right? Because you could spread that 10,000 hours out over, 20 years versus 10,000 hours over 10 years. When you condense that, my guess is that you're going to compound the results even further. So similarly with a habit, if you can condense that into a shorter window, like you said, intensity plus more reps quicker versus it being spaced out and you have to almost like remember what you're doing again, time after time, like it probably has a lot greater effect. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. And then other things are going to play into it too. Like, how much support do you have? The more support we have, the easier it is. How can we make this as easy and as obvious for yourself to do as possible?
Yeah. So let's talk about environment then. Since we're on that topic too, like what are some things in our environment that can help us create the behavior change more effectively?
Yeah, good question. Because environment plays a way bigger role than I think we often give it credit for. And so,
Yep.
how can we set up our environment, to make this just as easy on ourselves as possible? Because biologically, we're ease-seeking creatures. It's in our nature to want to take the path of least resistance. That doesn't mean we always do, but that's in our nature. To seek safety and comfort. So why not set ourselves up to make this again easy, and feel safe and doable for ourselves. So we'll go back to the eating example. That might look like cutting up fruits and vegetables and keeping them in the front of your fridge, making them very, very easily accessible. When it comes to food in particular, out of sight, out of mind goes a long way for most people. Sometimes it is as simple as don't buy it, don't keep it in the house.
Yeah, very good. I had another thought here with behavioral change or creating new habits. When we're thinking about creating a new habit, is it a new habit altogether, or are we replacing an existing habit?
Yeah, almost always our habits are replaced. They're not eliminated.
Okay.
So if we're looking at the eating example, and we might take a look at bored eating or emotional eating, which I struggled with at one time. To overcome that, I wasn't just gonna stop and sit in the dark, right? I had to find something else to fill that time and that space that brought me what I was actually seeking in that moment.
That's really good, because I think sometimes people will, and myself included, right? Like I'm guilty in this. Is like you think about something that you want to change, and it's like, oh, let me sit and just like think about this and reflect the change to happen. But you're right. I think it's, replacing that time. And sometimes I find that if I'm busy or doing more productive things, then those, I guess, less than desirable habits are less likely to happen.
Of course, yeah, that makes total sense. And to
Yep.
use that eating example, I mean, boredom for a lot of people is a reason, one of the most common reasons for emotional or binge eating.
Yep. All right. So let's talk about this, right? So you've got somebody that, let's say that, do you find maybe if somebody has effectively been able to change the habit that they've wanted to change, does that make it easier to then start changing other habits? Or let me rephrase this. Can you build momentum in being able to make these habit changes?
Absolutely. And I think that's what so much of this process is about. I literally visualize like a pendulum swinging. And so, what's it going to take to just get your pendulum starting to swing in that much, like this much? And then it will gradually start to go this way. But it really is a process of building up momentum. And then, once you start to make one tweak in one area of your life, automatically things are going to start to spill over and give you both that forward momentum and kind of that kick that will naturally want you to kick in the direction to keep going, if that makes sense.
No, it totally does. It totally does. So with people that are, let's say, maybe really good on a certain habit too. Okay. So we've built one habit in, now we're starting to create momentum on other habits. Let's say it's your healthy eating. Like once you've got this habit locked in, or let's say it's a habit that you want to develop of personal development, should you just keep doing what you're doing on those habits only? Or do you think there's ever a challenge to like get stuck in your good habits when you could be progressing even further? If that question makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think what you're describing is a plateau, which I think a lot
Right.
of us can relate to and is very normal if we don't keep forward progressing. And so, to your first question, absolutely. I think it's definitely worth striving to see that spill over, to keep that forward momentum going so you don't just get stuck at that one point.
Yeah, because I've always been of the mindset of you're either growing or you're dying, right? Like there's no like sitting in neutral. And I think that's true. Like sometimes people, they can be doing so well and they just kind of get in this mode. And like I've even caught myself in doing that. Like I'll take reading, for example. I used to never actually be a big reader. And then in my early 20s, like I really started to get into a lot of like the personal development. And I loved how that made me feel. Like I loved the fact that I was growing mentally. I felt like I was like progressing. It was helping me in my work. And then there gets to a certain time where it's almost like you become numb to the fact that you've done it. And I sometimes have to remind myself, hey, no, like stay in this habit. Like this is why you were growing so much. Like don't fall off the wagon on this.
Right. It's like you start to feel comfortable. And so the what's the word I'm looking for?
Like complacency almost.
Yeah, that kicks in and the excitedness of it kind of like kicks off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's probably true even for people with relationships, right? Like if we're thinking about people that end up, there's like the honeymoon phase, right? And then they get into a relationship. You have to work at keeping that, fresh all the time. And I would imagine, again, it's like same thing with behaviors that you're looking to keep fresh in your life.
Right. It really can be applied to so many things. I think there's a honeymoon phase at work, there's a honeymoon phase in relationships, and then certainly like a newness to something like self-improvement. When you first discover it, it's exciting and it feels good. You feel like you're really doing something for yourself. And then like anything, of course, that complacency kind of kicks in.
Yeah.
And it's our job to keep that momentum going in the direction that we want it to go.
For sure. I'm going to ask you this. This is just kind of came to me, but do you journal much? Are you big into, or like writing down goals or that sort of thing?
Yeah. So I have a love-hate relationship with journaling, if you will. I used to make myself journal every morning. And then I was like, you know what? I really don't feel like I'm getting much from this. Now I journal or I write when I'm in the mood. That being said, I have started writing down goals and I've noticed that has been a game changer for me.
Yeah. And do you go back and review those pretty regularly?
Yeah, I'll do weekly goals. So I'll write down like, okay, what's my focus for the week and how, and then really, really specific goals. How can I make this happen?
Yeah. I know you talk a little bit about visualization with the people that you work with as well.
Yeah.
Talk about that for a second. Cause I know like for me, like when I think about visualization, I can go back to countless times where I've used this effectively, whether it was when I was in college as an athlete, had a season where I had a lot of success, ended up winning the conference. And I remember literally running that race through my head for the entire season, just over and over, like how I thought it would play out, all the different scenarios. And, it's just funny because it unfolded the exact way that I had visualized. Or even, when I'm doing a podcast like this, like I will literally take time before and actually visualize the questions that I want to go through or visualize the introduction and like how I want that to go. And I think there's something to be said for just running those scenarios through your head and like really like seeing it and thinking about it. So I'm curious your perspective on visualization and maybe how that plays into our habits as well.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. And I think what you two just described is really priming your brain for a favorable outcome. And that's exactly what visualization is. Allowing us to paint this mental picture of exactly what it is that we want for ourselves. And then B, being willing to sit in it long enough to cultivate those feelings. How am I going to feel while I'm in this? Because once we can do that, then we can feel those feelings in the present moment. And to go back to our conversation earlier about that momentum, that can often be what kickstarts our momentum in the direction that we want it to go. Because our brains don't know the difference between experiencing an event and visualizing experiencing an event. They just know the feelings produced from either one, which is why visualization can be so powerful.
That's really good. That's the whole, I always just like talk about that as far as your mind or your mind doesn't know the difference between, or your subconscious and unconscious don't know the difference between what's real or what's fake, or your unconscious rather doesn't know the difference between what's real or what you tell it, I guess I should say. And so that's why I'm like, when I asked about journaling or we think about visualization, being able to see those things before they happen or speak those things before they happen, as far as your goals or the habits that you want to create, like you said, you're programming your mind to believe those things are already real. And then your body will follow through and actually act on those things that you tell it.
Right. It allows you to make decisions through the lens of what you want. So for instance, say I want to be a really mindful, healthy eater. And to your point earlier about telling my brain what I want or who I want to be, maybe it starts as simply as I make healthy decisions or I am a healthy eater. And then what starts to happen just naturally over time is you start to make decisions through the lens of a healthy eater or a mindful eater.
So as you're saying that, I want to hit on this point because I think this is really important, and the power of your words and how you phrase things. So when we're thinking about creating a habit right there, you said, I am a healthy eater. You didn't say, I don't eat junk food. Talk about the difference of those two statements. Why did you say I am a healthy eater versus I don't eat junk food?
Right. Well, anything that follows I am can be extremely powerful, right? Imagine telling yourself that all of the time. I mean, just naturally, you're going to start to create this in your life, even if you don't believe it right now. If you don't believe it
Yeah.
right now, that's okay. But you have the capability to create that. And then to your point earlier about our subconscious mind, if we keep telling it what we don't want and what we don't want, I think that's just going to start to bring in more of that.
Yeah.
Where we want kind of our mental focus to be on what do we want? Who am I? What do I want more of?
Yeah. Well, it's like, I mean, if you're sitting in a room and somebody says, hey, don't think about the pink elephant. It's like all of a sudden, that's all you're going to see in your head is a pink elephant, right?
Right.
And so
And
it's when you're telling yourself this of like, okay, don't do this, don't do this. It's all you're actually thinking about.
yeah, I think it's why a lot of the times diets don't work. It's all about
Mm.
restriction. It's all about what I cannot have. It's not about like, whoa, I get to make these healthy decisions to create this body that I'm really proud to live in that feels good. Same
Yeah.
exact things, both of which you're doing the same action, but see how one creates these feelings of restriction and then you're going to lose motivation. But then the other one, it's like you're doing something for yourself for an outcome that you want.
Yeah. That's really big. And I could go down the whole vein, just with my background in exercise physiology too, on the diet thing. I think that's so huge is people, yeah, they're always talking about what you can't have. And I think people develop this, and we're kind of taking a side tangent, but people develop this unhealthy relationship with food when it's like, no, reframe how you're thinking about food. Like food is the fuel that makes your body go. And so I feel like a diet plan is going to be way more. I don't even necessarily like the word diet. I don't know if I would call it more of like health maintenance or just lifestyle management or, health
Yeah.
management. Maybe health management is the right word, but it's
Yeah.
like when you can view food in a positive light and you understand that it's making your body go and it's making you healthier, it just creates a different energy around that whole thing versus, like you said, I can't do this or I can't have this, or this is all the bad stuff. And then people get caught up with just a lot of the negative emotions and perceptions around what they're trying to do with weight loss, for example.
Yeah, that feels like restriction. And when it comes down to it, it seems almost all of us just want balance, just want that sustainable lifestyle change. And so I think too, when we are willing to make these small steps, as opposed to just trying to change everything all at once, because that's often when we get overwhelmed, when we're
Yeah.
willing to make these small steps, things that we know we can commit to for that week, these things add up over time. And not only do they add up over time to get you closer to where you want to get to, but the other thing that happens is that you strengthen your sense of belief in yourself that you can do this every time you do what you say you're going to do. So
Yeah.
you're both gaining confidence as you go. And obviously, of course, you're moving yourself closer in the direction that you want to get to.
So starting small so that you can start building confidence that you can actually make bigger changes. Is that
Yeah.
what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. And if we go back to that pendulum swing or that forward
Yeah.
momentum, this is all about in the beginning, really just collecting small wins. So you know that you can do this. You know that you can do these things that feel hard in the beginning, but every time you do them, you start to swing your momentum that much more and that much more.
Yeah. I know that you'd mentioned, and it's actually in the book Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about, excuse me, habit stacking, right? And so building these habits on, maybe just talk about that briefly.
Yeah, that can be a really simple and really powerful technique. It's exactly what it sounds, is just stacking a new habit onto a pre-existing habit. For example, say I want to be a little bit more physically active. So I start doing calf raises every time I brush my teeth. I
Mm,
stack a new habit onto a pre-existing habit. And you can do it right before, during, or right after. But again, it's a really simple technique to start to practice new healthy habits. Because a lot of us have these intentions, are like, oh yeah, I want to try that this week. And then it kind of ends there. Whereas this gives you a really simple formula. Okay, here's exactly when I'm going to do that this week and how.
nice. Okay. So if we go back to my social media example, all right, let's talk through maybe how could myself or someone else implement habit stacking to maybe help change their social media consumption?
Yeah. So I think first would be to decide when you want to use social media throughout the day.
Okay.
Uh, I went through a period where I was like, all right, I'm not even going to look at social media until after 3:30 p.m. because that's when my work day ends most of the time. So in that scenario, okay, I'm willing to look at it after 3:30 p.m., maybe when I'm sitting on my couch. So every time I sit down on my couch, then I will check social media and then set a timer on my phone, however long I want that to be, 10 minutes, 20 minutes.
Nice. Okay. So the stacking would be sitting down on your couch would be the actual other, I guess, action that you would connect that to.
Yeah. And I think that part is big for social media because I think a lot of times we're doing it mindlessly, right? And so if we
Yeah.
can do it while we're not doing anything else, while we're not like eating and watching social media or watching TV and scrolling through social media, automatically it eliminates other things that's just going to keep us mindlessly going. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
It does. And I think as you're talking about this too, I think I remember, and I don't know if it was when I was, something that I was reading, but they were talking about, okay, when you're talking about your environment earlier and making habits sometimes just not as easily available to you is
Yeah.
even during the workday. It's like how many of us are sitting at our computer, but we've got our personal cell phone right there and we can just pick it up and we start scrolling. And the suggestion was, hey, why don't you just take that personal work phone and put it in the other room? Because then the likelihood of you taking the effort to get up and walk and go check that as frequently as you would if it was sitting right on the desk next to you is pretty low. And again, this is where I got to, preach into the choir here, but like, that's where I got to remember how to, to do those things that I've actually read about, is because when I was actually doing that, it worked. Like I would sit down at my desk at 9 o'clock in the morning and I wouldn't look at my phone until 12 because it was in the other room. And I just didn't feel like getting up and going and check it. And it was awesome because then you're so much more productive with, what you're doing work-wise.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally get that. And to that, I think we would explore like, okay, really, why do you want to do this then? Why is this important to you? But you're so right. It sounds almost painfully easy. And it is to make these things, just like these bad habits, if you will, just a little harder to do, or make our good habits just a little easier to do. I think for a lot of people, it sounds too good to be true, but it's a great starting point and it can make a difference.
Yeah. And when we're talking about why we want to make the change, all right. And I think this is where it goes back to identifying which habits are serving us and which habits aren't serving us. And you talk a lot about identifying what your core values are. And I remember the first time I heard core values, like I really had to think about that. I was like, man, what are my core values? There's like a few that I could rattle off, but do you have people actually like go through and write these down? Is that a step that they take on the front end as they're starting to identify which habits they want to change? And what does that look like?
Right. So in group workshops, I'll lead them through an exercise where I provide them just with 58 habits and they're selecting 58 core values and they're selecting their top core values. But with the one-on-one work I do with people, we'll actually do an exercise called Values Dictionary, where we're spending 30 minutes and I'm asking you questions that you're not getting asked on a day-to-day basis. I'll give an example, like, tell me a time where you felt most proud of yourself. Who were you with? What were you doing? How did you feel? So I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions like that. And then at the end, we're going to have some answers. And almost always in those answers, we're starting to pick up on some common themes. For instance, wow, a lot of your answers had to do with helping someone. And then we kind of funnel in maybe service is a core value of yours. So having someone to ask you those questions, or these are questions too that you could be asking yourself to really fine tune what's most important to you. What do you want to create and feel in your life?
It's really good. Absolutely. Do you have some success stories from people that you've worked with who have started, they came to you like, hey, Leighanne, this is really what I want to change. And then they've been able to make some awesome changes.
Yeah, I'm actually putting together a client testimonial video right now, which has been fun. The biggest ones that stand out in my mind are weight loss success stories and then mindful eating success stories. And of course, these go hand in hand, but it almost always has to do with changing our relationship to food. This is coming full circle now to what we were talking about earlier, but really looking at what are we doing while we're eating? So am I usually eating because I'm feeling something, or am I eating because I'm hungry? Let's take a close relationship at a close look at our relationship with food. And see too, if we're not eating because we're hungry, then why are we eating? Is it because I'm bored or sad or lonely? Because if that's the case, that's okay. But then let's find what actually brings you fulfillment, connection, and little sparks of joy, because that's actually what you're seeking. So now not only are we changing your relationship to food, but your life is just kind of improving in general, because we're addressing these things that are inside of you, right? And so this goes back to what we were saying earlier too, about how these changes can spill over into all areas of our lives.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool. And so it's people that have actually been able to implement and do these things pretty well, then like you've gotten like the feel good moments where somebody's like shot you a message and like, hey, like this is something that I was able to do. Like, thank you so much. I know for me, like that's always like the most rewarding part of, when you're working with people.
Oh, 1,000%, right? It makes me tear up. And granted, I cry very easy, but it brings tears to my eyes. I love it. And I feel really, really grateful to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what are you excited about moving forward then most with, as you've branched out on your own into business and the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So continuing to grow LGB Well. Right now with LGB Well, I partner both with employers and with individuals. So for employers, I'll go into their workspace and bring well-being into their workspace for anywhere from a day to host a wellness day or a wellness workshop, up to a 3-month period of really being on site that 3 months, implementing a multifaceted wellness program that teaches people different mind-body wellness practices and really works intimately with them along the way, helping them form a wellness plan that just works for them. And then continuing my behavioral health coaching, which is the one-on-one work I do with people. And this uses motivational interviewing techniques. It obviously uses the science of human behavior change and positive psychology to really, again, work intimately with people to help them create the change that they want to see in their lives. And a lot of that has to do with what we just talked about today, habit formation, changing our habits to really best serve us.
That's awesome. I feel like I kind of bounced around with a lot of the questions that I was asking you, because you would say so much good stuff and then it would trigger, okay, I want to ask about this and go back this. And I feel like we kind of came back full circle several times on this, but one of the recurring themes that I feel like I heard from you is just to kind of sum this up for our audience too, is that a lot of this is really going to just start with an awareness, number one, of where you currently are, what you want to change, and why you want to change that. And I think just overall, how these different habits or behaviors make you feel and the desired feeling that you're looking for. And I think that, the kind of like the feeling piece around this is really important for people to be able to slow down and self-evaluate. I think sometimes that's the piece that we have to remind ourselves is like, hey, don't beat yourself up over this. Don't beat yourself up over this habit that's not quite where you want it to be yet. Let's just recognize it and understand, how is this making me feel? And then that's going to give you the starting point to actually then go and address what you need to change with that behavior. But am I right in kind of the way that I'm summing this up here?
Yeah. I thought you summarized that very, very well. And what I think too, you were saying is that it's a practice, because it is. And I think, like you said, we can beat ourselves up in the beginning, but in the beginning, a lot of times we just don't know, or we're learning so much. So it's okay that we're like that. It's not a lateral progression. It's not really supposed to be.
Yeah. I tell people that with weight loss all the time, is that when they get into the gym and, hey, if you're going to start a strength program, the progression is not always linear. Matter of fact, the first time you step on a scale after you've started a lifting program, your weight might even go up a couple pounds because you're gaining fat-free mass, which is heavier than fat mass. But guess what? Your overall health profile is going to be better. And now that you have more of that fat-free mass, you're going to start burning more body fat. So then the weight loss comes after that. And so I think so often when we're looking at progression in anything, behavioral changes, any of that, like, be okay with the fact that it's not necessarily going to be linear, right? Like, it might take you a little bit of time to get up to speed. And then once, like we talked about, gaining momentum with any of these things, gaining reps, gaining intensity with the behaviors that you're trying to change, the frequency, all of those things are going to start to change that linear curve steeper and steeper so that those behaviors start to change more quickly.
That's such a good reminder for all of us in really any area of life, right? But it's so true. I mean, the more I practice it today, the easier it will be to do tomorrow.
Totally. Well, this is awesome. Any kind of like closing thoughts, or if you could give people just like one last tip as they're, thinking about their habits?
Oh, yeah. Okay. One last tip. I think one thing we touched on just now, which is so important, is to remind ourselves that it is a practice and it's just a little bit of practice each day, just a little bit of practice each day. And sometimes practice goes better than others, and that's okay. And that's part of the process. It certainly helps to have someone help keep you accountable as you go, because we do have days where we may fall off the wagon or we may not feel like it. But those are all just part of the grand scheme of it.
It's big. How can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so you can check out my website at lgbwell.com or find me on Instagram, which is lgbwell.
Love it. This is great. Love this topic. Love the conversation. Really appreciate you being on today, Leighanne. And guys, share the episode and feel free to leave a review. Feel free to drop a rating. And we look forward to seeing you guys on for the next one. Thanks again, Leighanne.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I love this conversation, and just thank you.
Awesome. All right, we'll talk soon. Take care, everybody.